My name is Russell Mefford. I was born in Florence, Alabama at ECM in 1968. I'm a jeweler, musician, and co-founder of the Fiddleworms.
When and how did you start playing music?
I loved it at an early age. There was a song that came out with a movie, Butch Cassidy and the Sundance Kid. It had raindrops on it, and I was obsessed with that song and played it so much I think my parents hid the little 45. I had one of those little record players, and I'd sit out in my garage and play it over and over and over again. And then after that, I fell in love with John Denver. Thought he was awesome. And my brother was a big Beatles fan, so that was the last thing in the world I wanted to do was like the Beatles. And then the Bee Gees came out with Sgt. Pepper, and I was going around bragging about how great these songs were. And my next door neighbor, Jimmy Jackson, told me, well, the Beatles wrote all those songs. So I became a Beatles fan, and they're probably my favorite band, though I like a whole lot of music. And at 15 years old, I started playing around on the guitar, and that's, I guess, when it started. I couldn't play other people's music very well, so I pretty much early on started writing my own songs.
Were you aware when you were growing up of the musical heritage of the Shoals, and did that have any influence?
No, man, I had no idea. Years later, you learn as I started getting more into music, learning more about my hometown and what all was going on. And it's ironic to me, Jimmy Johnson invited me over to his studio and was playing me different things. And I found out that day that while I was at the Cinema Twin in Sheffield watching Benji, that 2 blocks down the road, they were recording all the music for that movie. So I think I'm probably still learning things about this place,
I was growing up.
Yeah, I had no idea.
I loved the Rolling Stones.
Me too.
I had no idea that those
No,
songs were...
I didn't know Paul Simon was here. I didn't know Dylan was here. I guess in college, when Julian Lennon came to record. But I mean, before that, I wasn't really aware of the history. But when I was a junior in high school, Jimmy's son Jay had a band, Radio Tokyo. And on Friday nights, we would go over and tap on that back window at Muscle Shoals Sound, and they would let, it was a good way to get girls to hang out with you. So we would go and sit and watch them rehearse in that back closet. It was Jay Johnson, John Bloomer, Paul Etner, Jamie Morgan was with me during that time. He had a band called Breakaway that played all the proms when I was in high school. And he took me under his wing and showed me chords. And Jamie passed away at 27 from Lou Gehrig's disease, but he was a very early on influential person for me in music.
Like Muscle Shoals Sound was down on the...
It was when I was on the river. It was down on the river.
So I saw an interview with you online where you talk about a guy named Waz.
Waz, yeah, man.
Can you talk about him and how he influenced you to take up music?
Yeah, I met Waz. I had a bad experience with a summer camp here in Alabama. And also, I was 15 years old and dating a senior in high school. And so my parents were trying to get me out of town, So my sister is a very accomplished whitewater paddlist. She worked for the NOC. So she was a guide on the Nantahala and the Ocoee. And she had observed that the paddlers from a camp called Mondamin, right outside of Hendersonville, that the paddlers were fantastic. So they sent me up there to learn how to paddle. And Jan Brand picked me up at the Greenville, South Carolina airport to drive me over to the camp. And on the way over, she asked me what I was into. And I was like, well, I just started playing guitar. I love music. And she was like, wow, well, there's a guy on the maintenance staff that's named Waz who's played with B.B. King and Jimi Hendrix. And so I never got in a boat. I hunted him down. Remember the first time I met him, I was coming back from my swim test, and he was emptying a trash can into a dumpster. And I just saw him, I just knew, I was like, that's Waz, I was like, are you Waz? And he was like, yeah. I was like, have you ever made a record? And he was like, yeah, man, actually, I've done several records. And I was like, wow, that would just be, I mean, in my mind, that was like the most unattainable goal ever. You know, I was like, man, I would love to make that would be incredible if I could ever make a record. And he said, well, you and I'll make one. That was like my first interaction with him. And he would come in, once the word got out that he was this great blues player, he would come in to morning assemblies, and he would have me play. And he really pushed me. He'd be like, all right, tomorrow you're going to play I've Just Seen a Face by the Beatles. And I'd be like, holy shit, man. So I'd sit up all night, you know, trying to figure it out. And so I ended up working at that camp while I was in college, and Waz worked there. And when I graduated from college, I moved to Tampa hoping to start a band with Waz. And I had written a whole bunch of songs. We recorded those songs over in Clearwater, Florida, at Panda Studios. A guy named George Harris was the engineer there. And we had David Dix from the Outlaws played on that record. Howard, I can't remember Howard's last name. He was with Ian Hunter and Mott the Hoople. He was the keyboard player. So these were all people that Waz brought in, you know. So we recorded this project. And actually before then, while I was in college, we recorded a project over at Johnny Sandlin's studio in Decatur at Duct Tape. And Waz brought in Scott Boyer. It was the first time I met Scott. B.W. Wheeler, who's no longer with us but was a magnificent drummer. A friend that I met at the camp, David Kaminsky, played bass. And we recorded the first versions of a song called Attitude and Easy Girl, which are one of the first couple songs that I had written. And so got down to Tampa. We did that full project. It was obvious after about 9 months that the band, I was wanting to form a band with Waz, but he just had situations that it was not going to work out, you know, man, to be able to travel and play. And so my dad, he got bladder cancer, and I was like, man, I should come home. So I came home with that project in my pocket, idiotically, naively thinking that I would get some studio players, you know, to back me up, and we would go, you know, that's how green I was. Like, we'll go promote this project. So I was invited to a party by Charles Van Deventer. Charles had a great band called Stain Mecca, and had Matt Ross and Chris Quillen and Pat Thrasher were in that band. And he invited me to a party over at Chris's girlfriend Lori's house. And they were celebrating. They had cut some songs over at UNA studio for Brad Futrell. Hand of Pain is what they were calling it. And Patterson Hood was cutting like Pollyanna, what is it? He was cutting songs over there. So he was at that party, and we all sat around in a circle and just traded songs, just played songs in the round. And I had some acoustic gigs. I was playing at Court Street in Florence and the filling station across the river. And there was a Court Street in Decatur that I was playing at. And from being in school in Birmingham, I was playing down at Flamingos and the few contacts I had down there. And so the next Court Street Cafe gig I had, Chris showed up with his acoustic and sat in and played all night with me. And after the night ended, I gave him half my money, and I said, anytime you want to play with me, I am totally in. And so that's kind of how we started playing together. And after several months of playing, he's like, what do you want to do? And I was like, well, you know, I've got this project, and I'd like to put this band together, you know, to support this project. And he was like, well, I'll put the band together for you. So he recommended and called Matt Ross, who was our original bass player, and Scott Kennedy on drums. And the only thing that didn't work out was my idea. I wanted to have a keyboard player, you know. So we brought in Jay Wilson, who's an excellent keyboard player, and we played together for a good while, but he ended up going off to do his own thing. Mr. Wilson, which he did with Peter Thompson over at Zane Records in England, he's a great player. So we continued on as a four-piece, And Chalmers Davis came in to see us one night. We'd play at Cheers, and when he wasn't touring with Little Richard, he would be our keyboard player. So, again, kind of the falling out. And if I'm giving you guys too much information, tell me to stop at any point. So, Johnny Sandlin came to see us over at the Tip Top, and he offered to record us. So again, I went back to Johnny's with the band this time, and at this point I realized I needed to shelve my Tampa project because the band was a living, breathing thing. It was the songs that we had recorded down there, and I even had the Yellowhammer artwork and the name of the so backwards and the name of the record together. But the Fiddleworms to me were the direction I want, and I wanted to be in a band, you know. So Johnny brought us over. We did a demo. He offered us a recording contract. He recommended that we have the contract looked at. I took the cassette tape and the contract over to Steve Backus, who's an attorney here in Tuscumbia. Steve was knocked out by it. He was like, "How soon do you need to get back with him?" And I was like, "Well, I don't want to leave him hanging." He's like, "Well, can you give me a week? I'd like to talk to some people in Nashville. Maybe we can get a deal, or Johnny produces. We do this whole thing." And I was like, "Cool. Yeah, sure, man." So I called the band, and everybody was in. I made a mistake. I should have called Johnny, but I didn't, man. And Jay, the keyboard player, started feeling guilty about it, and instead of calling and telling me about it, he called Johnny and told Johnny that I was having an attorney shop his tape around Nashville to get a deal. So all of a sudden, Steve Backus quits returning my phone calls. I'm like, what is going on, man? You know, and so a couple of weeks go by, and we're at rehearsal, and Jay confesses to me that the reason you're not getting phone calls is I told Johnny about all this, and Johnny told me he called and threatened to sue Steve Backus for shopping the tape around. And so I was young, man. I was really mad. So I split the band up. I was like, if we're going to implode from the inside out, man, I'm out, you know, man. And so Chris was like, well, are we going to keep playing? I was like, well, man, if you want to, yeah. And so we just played acoustic. We were in the filling station playing. Steve Backus comes in. I could tell he wanted to crawl underneath the table, man, when he saw us in there, but he didn't leave. And after we played a set, I went over and sat down right by him, and he was like, so are y'all recording a record with Johnny Sandlin? I was like, we're not recording a record with anybody, man, you know? And he's like, well, if you want me to, I can call Rodney Good and Harold Shedd's son, Mitch Shedd, up in Nashville. They have Revolution Studio up on Music Row, and have them come down and listen and see if they're interested. And I was like, man, just don't pull my chain, you know, man. I was like, if you want to do that, great. And if you don't, it's cool. And sure enough, he called them, and they came down and saw us at the corner in Huntsville. And then they brought us up to record to try to get a record deal. So we recorded Yellowhammer over 6 days. We went up 3 days, I think, in early June, and then maybe the following November. I can't remember. It's inside the liner notes. But it was originally supposed to be a demo to try to get a record deal. So we kept playing and booking gigs, and then they were shopping that tape around, and we had interest from several record labels. One in particular, Polygram Records, was interested in us, and they were saying they were going to send people out to see us. So we sent them a list of shows that we had, like, okay, we're going to be in Florence for Memorial Day weekend here, we're going to be at City Stages, we're going to be at City Fest, we're going to be down in New Orleans here. And they originally said that they were going to come see us play at the Memorial Show in Florence. And so Hester Cope from Main Street was on me about a press release for the show. And so I called Backus, and I was like, man, are you sure they're coming? You know, man. He was like, yeah, they say they're coming, man. And so it was in the paper that Polygram Records was coming to see us play. And then the day before, they called, and they're like, hey, man, we're not going to be able to make the Florence show, but we will definitely either be at City Stages or City Fest. And then, of course, that night, Chris passed away in an automobile accident. And we just kept playing. You know, I don't know how much y'all want to know about that, or, I mean, we, all right. Well, he when I first ran into him, man, I was 16 years old, and my friend Chad Peden said, you're writing all these Beatles, Tom Petty type folk songs, and this guy's like the most awesome guitarist I've ever seen. I need to put you two together. And so we went out to Chris's house, his dad's house out in Kendale. And Carol had set up basically a studio down there with a drum set and amps. And I walked down with my acoustic, and I'm strumming Bob Dylan songs. And Chris, I don't think hardly ever looked up. He was just, he'd do a Cousin It thing where he'd fold his head over and his hair would come down all to totally cover his face. And he's there like ripping through Eruption and, Eddie Van Halen licks, and I'm, blowing in the wind. And we left, and I told Chad, I was like, man, I have nothing at all in common with that guy, And so, I was 18, he was 16 at that point, and so we're talking almost 10 years later, when we got together playing those acoustic shows and put the band together, everybody told me when I first hooked up with him, they're like, you're not going to be able to depend on him, man. He's a great guy, but... and that was the farthest thing from the case for me, man. I would do all the calling and booking gigs and arranging rehearsals. And, of course, back then there were no cell phones, so you had to call each individual person and get directions to the clubs and that sort of thing, which took a little more time. But Chris I was working at the jewelry store during the day. So, we would drive together to work in the morning. He would take my car, and he would go and put up flyers and do things, band-related, physically band-related things while I was at work, and then pick me up at 5, and we'd drive to wherever we were playing, man. And he never left me sitting on that corner, ever. And to kind of tell you the kind of person that he was, well, we were playing at one point like 7 days a week, and we were driving over to Huntsville to play, and a guy had given Chris a cassette tape of songs that he had recorded. And so we put it in, and I immediately start tearing it apart. I'm like, man, that bass is out of tune, man. And he looked at me and said, hey, man, why don't you first find something that you like about it? And so that's Chris Quillen, man. So, and that's helped me in, all kinds of ways in my life. And I fail miserably at it, but it's just for him to say that at 26 years old. Kind of like the bully in town, people would come in and want to get up and cut heads with Chris, and he would show his expertise, but he never showed anybody up. Like if once it got past the point of the person realized I shouldn't have attempted this, man, he would back off, and they would end up playing together. That's the kind of guy he was. So we were playing that street party. It was a Memorial Day party in front of Callahan's, which was a bar on Court Street that was band-friendly. There weren't a lot of band-friendly places in the 90s. It was basically the Filling Station, Union Station, Callahan's, and Cheers over at the Ramada were pretty much back in that day. They had pulled a big tractor-trailer flatbed out, and we were playing. There was a bunch of people there, and the plan was to go back to Scott and Matt's. They were renting a place on Shoal Creek, and we had people with tents in the yard. There were roadblocks up, so we were very, really more worried about going to jail than anything else. But the plan was we were all going to sleep out there. So we played the show. Rodney and Mitch Shedd's band opened the show for us. So they were down from Nashville. It was a big celebration. So we went back to the house, played music, stayed up all night. My girlfriend at the time was not drinking, so she drove me over, and we brought my parents' little runabout over. And it was one of the periods where I was letting Chris borrow my car. My parents had been out of town, so I was driving my mom's station wagon, and he was driving my little Chevy. So I brought that little runabout around, and we were all going to go over to the galley to eat breakfast. And Chris was on the swing, so I was like, "Come on, man, let's go eat." And he was like, "No, man, I'm just going to lay down, and we were going to play. They had a volleyball net set up there, and Wolf would smoke chickens and stuff. So I was like, well, I'll see you later this afternoon then. So we went over and had breakfast with Rodney Good and that band and us at the galley. I dropped them back off, and my girlfriend and I drove back around to put the boat up. And when we got there, my dad was standing on the pier, and he had told me that they had gotten a call. They originally thought it was me because it was in my car, so they called my dad first. And when I called Carol, he had already known, but I told my dad, he was like, there's been a horrible accident. Chris is gone. I was like, that's impossible, man. I just saw him. I was talking to him an hour and a half ago, so it was, I know it's probably a weird thing to say since my mother and father had passed away, but that was probably the hardest kind of life shift that I shouldn't say that because there's always things worse and people go through much worse, but it was a heart-crushing thing to where music had always been something that I went to that was my happy place. And there was a period of time after that where it was the worst place in the world. But we got a blessing. We just kept playing. We, without a guitar player, And one night at rehearsal, Scott Kennedy, Wolf, walks in with Rob Malone. And Rob's like, I want to do it. And he really helped us heal. Rob is a completely beautiful but different guitar player than Chris was. And he took a lot of arrows because we had a demo, and we wanted to go ahead and release it, just if not anything else, so people could hear Chris and what he was about. So we went out playing those songs, and people would come up to Rob and be like, "You're playing it wrong. That's not." And Rob and Chris were close too, or that's not the way Chris would have played it, But if he had tried to copy what Chris was doing, it would have been horrible. Man. So what he did was really beautiful for us, And so we released the Yellowhammer record. We started getting some pretty good gigs, man. We got to play at the side stage of when Santana played Oak Mountain. They just released that side stage, so we got to play before Santana and after Santana, which was great. And we got to play on the same stage when the Allman Brothers came through there, and we got to open for Government Mule over at 5 Points Music Hall, and Colonel Bruce, back when Chris was alive, Colonel Bruce took a liking to us, and we probably played shows with him 8 or 9 times over our career. He was really generous to try to bring in local bands when he was playing. But Ronnie Knight, who builds Blue South guitars, we had just by accident, Ronnie was building prototypes of Blue South upstairs above Pegasus when we were rehearsing, getting started. And when we got asked to go over and record at Johnny Sandlin's, he lent me a prototype of a Macon that he had built. And we went over, and Johnny Sandlin and Chris, they A-B'd it against Chris's Les Paul, and they ended up using the Blue South on everything. And then Johnny picked up the phone and called Warren Haynes and Alan Woody, and they ended up having Ronnie make instruments for them. So it was just lucky for me just to be in that spot. But Ronnie and I became dear friends, and he gave me Jerry Wexler's address and asked me to mail a copy of Yellowhammer to him. And so, man, it was awesome. I was coming back from lunch one day, and my brother, who's really a big reason why I play music, because he loves music so much, but he couldn't stand it, because, he had to deal with me being late, man. He had to deal with a bunch of nonsense. But to walk in at lunch and Owen go, Russell, Jerry Wexler's on line 1 for you. I was like, far out, man. And he was like, well, what you're doing is interesting, man. He was like, I'm going to pass it along to someone over at Capricorn and someone over at Atlantic, and you may or may not hear from them, but here's my Florida address and phone number. Here's my New York address and phone number. And then about a week later, I got a call from Phil Walden. And he said, he's like, I think we're going to pass. He was like, I'm not sure. And then went to rehearsal. And I think, man, I just think the enormity of just, there wasn't ever really a lot of release after Chris passed away. We just kind of kept going, you know. And Chris touched a lot of people. A lot of people understandably loved him. And so Rob was just like, I just can't do it, man. You know, I can't do this. And so I went to Bacchus because he bought the ugly orange limousine we used to ride around in. He bought our PA. We had a per diem when we recorded in Nashville that he would, you know, do. And he was like, tell Rob, and Rob formed a little three-piece. I think Nathan James was in that band called Nine Bullets. You'd have to ask them, but like, he was just kicking around town doing that. And so Bacchus said, well, tell Rob I'll fund both projects. I'll fund the Fiddleworms and I'll fund Nine Bullets, and whatever happens is okay, you know. But Rob's not that kind of cat, man. He didn't want to do that. So he kicked around, and then I guess 4 or 6 months later, he moved to Athens and joined the Truckers. So at that point, Mitch Mann came on the scene, and my mom got sick. And probably the only time in my life that I mean, it was the right thing to come home, but I felt like I need to get serious, you know. I need to, you know, I love making jewelry. I mean, it's been in my family since, you know, 1911. There's been somebody in a jewelry store in Florence, you know. So I have a love for that. It definitely doesn't exceed my love for music, but I have a love for jewelry. And so I amicably said, well, let's shut it down, you know, man. And so just played, you know. I never stopped. You just can't, you know. There's no way to stop. You know that too, man, right? Once you get in your art, like whether it's photography or whatever, man, it's like if it gets in your blood, it doesn't go away. So I would play acoustic, still writing songs. And then Mitch Mann called me, gosh, I don't know, man. It was maybe 8 years later. So we disbanded in 99, and I don't know when. Sometime in the mid-2000s, I get a call from Mitch Mann, and he said, hey, you know, James LeBlanc is leaving Rodney Good's band. Would you mind calling and seeing if they're looking for a guitar player? And so I called Rodney. I hadn't talked to him in 8 years, you know, man. And I was like, hey, man, I heard James is leaving the band, and if y'all are looking for a guitar player. And he was like, no, I don't know what we're going to do about that. He was like, but I still got those initial recordings we did with Rob. You want to come and finish that record? So I got on the phone, and I called. Chalmers was over in Jackson, Mississippi. Rob was still living in Athens. And of course, Mitch and I continued to play acoustic together through that time. And Matt and Scott had moved to Huntsville and joined a band with Mike Roberts called 5 O'Clock Charlie. So we all went up to Nashville and finished that record. And that's kind of how the Fiddleworms got back together after that hiatus. And I didn't know what to call the record, so I was sitting at a Chinese restaurant called the Peking over in Florence. And they had that kind of Chinese zodiac menu. And I was like, wow, well, I'm 60, I'm the monkey, you know. I was like, well, I wonder what Chris is. And I looked, and he was the cock. So I was like, we got to call the record You're the Cock, man.
So great title.
Thanks, but my wife was totally against it at the time. And then it turned out, it took longer than expected to mix the record. Um, so, I'm always wanting to get stuff done. Like, let's get it done. Let's get moving. And I wanted to get that record out as soon as possible. It turned out it was going to be the following year before it came out. And so I went over and played it for Dick Cooper, and he liked it, and he offered to road manage us. And he's like, "What are you calling it?" And I said, "Year of the Cock." And he's like, "I'm Year of the Cock." I was like, "Far out, man." He said, "And guess what next year is?" I was like, "What?" And he said, "Year of the Cock." So he actually accidentally released Year of the Cock during the Year of the Cock. So,
Awesome.
yeah.
Well, that was meant to be.
Yeah, man. Anytime I try to do something, it gets totally fucked up, man. My best advice for people is like to work hard at your craft, and then just try to, for me anyway, and then just try to stay out of the way, man, and there's certain things that if you try to make them happen, or certain things that if I've tried to make them happen, they'll never happen. But if you step back, some magical things will happen, man.
Gotta let luck do its thing sometimes.
Yeah, and I don't know that I would call it luck. I think it would be called sweat equity mixed with humbleness and a belief in the universe, man.
Karma, or like, no, that's not the word.
No?
All that.
All that.
So you've said a couple of things, you dropped a couple of names that are ringing bells for me, because we were talking before you got here about what the music scene was like
Sure.
in the Shoals in the 90s, which was to say, like, the way I remember it was you guys.
Well, there was LSD 30, and there was Chimpy had a band called. His sense of humor kills me. It was Jim Jones and the Electric Kool-Aid Band or something like that. It's just, and of course, Mind Station, great band. That's Toby Holder and Ben. Gosh, I can't believe I'm spacing on Ben's last name. His dad, Abraham. His dad is an actor. Was in.
Bean.
Thank you, Todd Bean.
Mm-hmm.
Sorry, gosh, Todd. I apologize, brother. Yeah, man.
I'd forgotten completely about Mind Station.
Yeah, and I've forgotten who the other. They were a three-piece, but they were probably my favorite local band, and we just. When I came home in '92, there weren't a lot of people that I saw out in clubs playing original music, and there wasn't a lot of reception from club owners to have that happen. And we just said that's what we were going to do, and for some reason it worked, man. We would throw in a cover here or there, but predominantly 90 to 95% of our set was just playing songs that I had written, So.
Was a lot of the 90s being the way it was, like, due to just lack of places to play?
I think so.
Musicians have to sort of make shows happen in a way that maybe isn't the case anymore.
I think for whatever reason there wasn't a real spotlight on Muscle Shoals at that point in time, whether into the 80s with all that drone stuff going on. When I listen to music in the 80s, I'll be like, especially now that we have satellite radio, and I'll go to like the 80s channel and I'll listen, and I'll be, after a while I'm like worn out with that digga 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 digga, that drone that puts everything to like a living, instead of a click you don't hear, it's a click you do hear. And then you have somebody like Petty come on or something, like, all right, there's a band, So I think that might have hurt. You'd have to ask Rodney and David Hood and those guys as far as the professional studio scene during that time. I know when they brought me in to do, when I was like a sophomore in college, that would have been like late 80s. You had like Shenandoah, was a hit coming out. And then you had the songwriters like Walt Aldridge, uh, Mark Narmore, Robert Byrne. All those cats were writing great songs. But I remember having a conversation with David Hood. He was struggling to find gigs. I mean, there were no gigs for him either, you know. I mean, so it was kind of a blanket dead spot maybe. And Charles Van Deventer and Pat Thrasher moved to California, and they were wanting, you know, and then Patterson moved to Athens shortly after I got home, and I think both of those were obviously great decisions for both of those guys, but for whatever reason, Chris and I wanted to do it out of here. We were like, man, there was a band called Blind Melon that we were fans of, and some of those guys had come out of Mississippi State over in Starkville, and so we were like, if they can get a band to break out of Starkville, surely to God we can get a band to break out of Muscle Shoals. So that was kind of our motivation for it. And during that time, sitting here now to think back of seeing a 15-year-old Jimbo Hart, and Shauna Tucker, and Mikey Ledbetter, Daniel Ledford, they would all sneak into Callahan's to hear us play, which is very flattering seeing what all they've accomplished, you know. Makes me kind of like a proud, I don't know, just like proud to be a part of it in a small way, you know.
I had forgotten about until Jamie Barrier mentioned the Wednesdays.
Oh yeah, man.
I got in that band too. But
Yeah.
I don't know, it just felt like growing up at that time as being a teenager that like, I mean, there weren't the opportunities to see live music that there are now. Like,
Right. Yeah, and Jamie, you know, he was working at a Subway, I think, when we were first getting started, and then I first saw him play right after Chris died. They did a memorial concert over at UNA, and Jamie played there. And they're one of my favorite bands. Them and the Pollies, Billy Allen and the Pollies, those guys, fabulous. But Jamie, I mean, they travel Europe, you know, they're the real deal, man. So.
Billy Allen and the Pollies came to Oxford a few weeks ago.
How was
It
that?
was fantastic. I'd never heard it before. But
Yeah, man, I really think those guys. I hope what in my mind is supposed to happen happens, man, because they're fabulous.
they work hard too.
Yeah. Yes, they do, man. And so do the Haints. You know, that's the one thing. Those guys, if you look back on those bands, all of those guys, they didn't just go and start playing 2003. You know, they're starting out in small clubs and doing the thing on the merit of building a fan, one fan at a time. Incredible.
I was telling Abraham, Billy Allen and Pollies started playing. Nobody was there. They were early in the day. And like maybe 3 songs into their set, people had come from all over and descended on the stage.
Awesome.
You know, so you're not guaranteed an audience, I guess.
Yeah.
You know,
Yeah.
but they sure drew one in.
They made it happen.
Yeah. So how is the new version of the Fiddleworms different from the old version?
Well, you know, without Chris, they'll never, you know, that was a period in time. The new version, once we got back together in the mid-2000s, it changed for me from being a weight that made it hard for me to breathe, to try to sing, to being a celebration. I don't exactly know when that happened or how that happened. And now it's just it's about people, you know, and us getting together, and I view it as better than any money or gold or anything, to be able to have the opportunity to sit in a room with those guys and write music and go out and play. So I guess it's a celebration.
Can you you tell us about working with Donnie Fritz?
Yeah, man. So my dad had that same place out on Shoal Creek. Uh, he was letting me stay out there, and Scott Boyer had a house nearby there, and we would always. And Dick Cooper had a house over there too. And so one evening, Scott Boyer was like, "Hey man, why don't you and I write a song together sometime?" And I'd always wanted to, but I never had the guts to ask him. And so he and I got together and we wrote a song called "Don't Shoot the Prophet." And at the same time, Waz was doing some kind of Graham Parsons tribute down in Tampa, and we brought in a Will Corey and Sheenan Cole, and Daniel Ledford took photographs, and they came in and filmed us over at the Nut House, and we did a couple covers of Graham Parsons and did "Don't Shoot the Prophet." And at that shoot, he said, "Hey man, why don't we get together and try to write another one on Monday, and would it be okay if I asked Donnie to come along?" I was like, yeah, that'd be great. Sure. Trying not to pee on myself. So then, we go to eat first. With Donnie, you go to eat. So we went to the Killen Diner, had some breakfast, and then walked into Scott's had a little studio in his living room, and Donnie sat down and played basically the first verse and chorus of a song called "I Need a Change." And basically Scott and I tossed in lyrics ideas, maybe a chord change here or there, but it was basically a Donnie Fritz song that we got to add onto. And then when we did the Fiddleworms See the Light record, we included that song on the record, and Donnie and Scott came in and sang with me on it, which was awesome. And Donnie, he was a lover. As talented as he was, he also loved music. Like, you can probably ask almost any Muscle Shoals artist that's playing here locally that it was very rare that you played a show and looked out and didn't see Donnie Fritz sitting at a table watching and supporting, and if you wanted him to come up and sit in, and sing a song or two. So he was an amazing guy.
Tell us about the Shoals tribute shows.
The Muscle Shoals meets. Yeah, man. So a little over 9 years ago, in November 7th, it'll be 10 years since I've reopened the family business. So this was a little over 9 years ago. I just reopened the store, and within 2 days, Earl McGuire from the Healing Place and then Lance and Beth Howard from Room in the Inn came in. They said, hey, they both said the same thing basically. They were like, we would like to hire the Fiddleworms to play a benefit for our charity. And I told them, I was like, well, this is a perfect situation for me because I've just reopened I don't have any money, man. I was like, but I can give you my time. I was like, but I've got to pay everybody else. And I was like, I don't want to do that taking money out of your pocket, or it would defeat the whole purpose of having a benefit. And I was like, I'm a huge Beatles freak. This needs to be more than just us on a Saturday night. I've got the DVD of when the Beatles played the Sullivan Theater on February 9th of '64. It's got all those old commercials. I was like, maybe we could show some of those old commercials and try to recreate that environment, and then we would come out and play some Beatles covers. But I never had any idea how to finance it. So a year and a half later, when Outback was still here in Sheffield, I was getting drunk at the bar at Outback, and a guy who owns a car dealership named Mike Miller just walks up to me out of the blue and says, hey man, the Velcro Pygmies want me to sponsor a show for them. Do you have got any ideas for a show? I was like, man, I've had a show in my head for like a year and a half. If you don't mind me asking, how much money do they want? He's like, well, they want $3,500 from me and $3,500 from Mark Blackburn over at CD&S Bank. I was like, shit, man, I think I could put on a pretty cool show for that. But we had both been drinking, so I didn't act on it. A couple weeks later, I run into him again at the bar, and he's like, "Hey, man, are you working on that show?" And I was like, "Well, I am now, man." So I called up Charles Rose and Harvey Thompson, and we set up to recreate. They played with John Lennon on his last public performance when they were touring with Elton John on Thanksgiving of '79. I can't remember when it was, '77 maybe. But so we reprised the songs that he did with them with those horns. We lucked out that Jimmy Hall was available from Wet Willie, and he came and did Wilson Pickett's version of Hey Jude. I had Jerry Phillips sing a Carl Perkins tune that his dad had recorded that the Beatles had covered. And so it just kind of fell together. But it was funny, man. I called the charities up. I was like, man, I got great news. The show is going to happen. We raised $7,000. And they were like, man, that's fabulous. What did you do with it? And I was like, well, I spent it. And they were like, well, that's not normally how you do this sort of thing. And I was like, well, I'll be honest with you. I don't know what I'm doing, man. I was like, but in order to book this show, I have to, that's the only way I knew to do it. But I did lay in bed before that show thinking, oh, man, what if we only, because you know how this town is. We're so spoiled here with all the great music that it's not a guarantee that people are going to be able to come out, So I was worried that I had spent $7,000 and was going to raise $500 or something, but it worked. It worked. The show sold out. We raised over $11,000 for each of the charities. Paid, about 15 musicians, for the night, and had a lot of fun. So it kind of took a life of its own. The next year we did Muscle Shoals Meets the Stones. Then on February the 27th of 2020, we did Muscle Shoals Meets Sam Phillips. And then, of course, 2 weeks later, the whole world shut down. And so we were able to not miss a year. So in 2021, in June, we did Muscle Shoals Meets Tom Petty. And then the next year, we did Muscle Shoals Meets the Swampers. And then last year, we did Muscle Shoals Meets the Eagles. And over the 6 years, we've raised over $115,000 for the Healing Place. I don't have numbers for Room at the Inn. They bowed out after the Swampers show, so it all went to the Healing Place last year. But I had a childhood friend of mine, Billy Ray Castile. He had during the Beatles show, he called me. He did not like the management of Room in the Inn. He's a friend, so he didn't lean on me too hard, but he was suggesting, you need to look into that. I don't know that you want to be supporting that sort of thing, man. And I was like, well, I just never thought it'd be any kind of debate, helping homeless people and grieving children. I never knew that would be any kind of, controversy. And for him, it wasn't the homeless, it was the management of the organization that he had issues with. So, but he left me be. And it played out on its own. And at some point, but he told me, he was like, well, if you ever get away from them, I'll give you $10,000. So I didn't. We went on with the shows for 5 more years after that. And then when Room in the Inn, was not a part of the Eagles show, I called him out on it, man. I called him up. And to his word, he was a huge sponsor for last year's show. So when I went to meet with him about doing something this year, he said, yeah, man, I'll give you $10,000 every day you and I are alive, but I thought you were doing this about autism. My youngest son, Armstrong, is nonverbal autistic, and he's 14 years old, and he's wonderful. But I told Billy Ray, I was like, yeah, man, I never wanted this to be about me, And he was like, well, it's not about you, it's about a bunch of people. So I was like, well, that's true, man. So I went home and talked to my wife and talked to the band, and they were all for it, and talked to the healing place, and they were very graceful. And so I went and met with, you know, I call this place my hometown, and when I say my hometown, I was born and raised and went to school in Florence, and my business is in Florence, but I consider my hometown the whole Quad Cities, like we're one big community in my humble opinion. So when we decided to go this direction of doing something for special needs, I was like, if we build something, we can't build something on one side of the river. If we build it on one side, whatever we do on one side of the river, we need to do equally on the other side of the river. So I went and met with the folks at Shoals, asked them what they needed the most. They said they needed a special needs playground at the middle school. So I was like, get me drawings and a quote. And then I went and met with Becky Odell over in Florence, who's over the special needs on the Florence program. I asked her what she needed the most, and she said they needed a special needs playground at the high school. It's like, wow, man. So got drawings and a quote, and we bounced around venues for a minute, but then when we settled on the Shoals Theater, I realized that, if we sell out both nights, which it looks like we're going to, I say only, it's not only, we started with a $7,000 budget, 7 years ago, and it's going to take $140,000 to build both of these playgrounds. So if we sold out both nights, it seems so silly for me to say only, because it's not only, but it's going to raise $60,000, which is wonderful, but that's not even halfway to what we need to get to build the playgrounds. So I divided the first night up into 10-seat sections and went around with the drawings of the playgrounds and talking about what we were trying to do. And we sold those sections for $10,000 a section. And we had some $5,000 sections, a little off on the wings, and some $2,500 sections. Before we sold a ticket, man, we raised over $130,000.
Awesome.
So we're going to build some fucking playgrounds, man.
Good cause, man.
Like I said, has very little to do with me. You know what I mean, man? It's like all that stuff. I had no desire to go outside to search for special needs. You know what I mean? Just staying out of the way, man.
Any musical highlights for you from that?
Oh, man. There's a bunch. To hear Charles Rose tell the story of meeting John Lennon and then hear them play that trio of songs that they did that night, and get to sing Lucy in the Sky with Diamonds with those horns, and Donna Jean and Clint Bailey, our keyboardist now, was a highlight for me. To see David Hood and Barry Beckett's son Mark Beckett do Kodachrome with Rob Aldridge singing was incredible. To hear Angela Hacker sing Southern Accents by Tom Petty, I wept. And there are plenty that I'm missing, I'm sure, I know. But so yeah, the Muscle Shoals meet shows have been a real joy, and it seems like the musicians enjoy it. And my goal, or our goal as a collective community with those shows, is for it to be full circle. Like everybody from the people that work so hard to make the show great, to anybody who buys a ticket or is a sponsor, for them to be like, we're doing good work here, but man, that was good, I would have bought a ticket for that anyway. That's what the goal is.
Do you mind?
What?
Do you think it's had some unintended benefits for musically? Because it seems like you're really good at bringing people together. There's always a bunch of young people. There's a lot of the old timers who are just the legacy artists that we have. But do you think there's some benefit of those people being in the same room at the same time and getting to rub shoulders with each other. You know what I mean? 'Cause
I hope so.
A lot of them stay in their silos. You know what I
Sure.
mean? Unless there's a reason to come together.
Right on.
It's not like David Hood's gonna go over to Daniel Chrysler and be like, let's hang out, you know,
Right.
or whatever. But like, do you think there's been some like other benefit from just bringing that many people together?
I hope so. I mean, I hear. It makes my day because I'm constantly thanking all those guys. I mean, young and old. It's an honor that they would be willing to even be on the show, you know. So, and the common response is, "No, man, we look forward to this. You know, like this is something we really enjoy doing," and so it makes me feel like maybe it is bringing people together, which would be like. It would be that would be a very fulfilling thing for me if I had a small part in that. I mean, we do try to put out there like, you know, we can't give any seats away for the shows because all that money goes to the charity. But I tell people like, your wife, your kids, if you're playing the show, they're welcome anywhere. We're welcome, and most of those musicians buy seats for their loved ones anyway. I mean, you know, we all if my wife Allison wants a seat, then I buy her a seat, you know, man. My son Christopher wants to come. We buy seats. But if you just want to come hang out, that's cool too, you know.
How old is your son?
Christopher is 17, Armstrong is 14. Yeah.
Maybe one more question?
Yeah, whatever you want to do.
Yep, we've got about an hour, so, yeah.
How would you, no, I'll go with this one. What advice would you give to young and aspiring musicians?
Keep swimming. Man, just don't ever stop. If it's in you, if it's what you want to do, it's gonna it will happen. It may not happen in the way that you think it's gonna happen. I mean, for me, you know, in my 20s, I wanted to be a rock star on a big stage in front of thousands of people. And at 56, to be close to seeing being part of a community of musicians that build a couple playgrounds to help some children, it's like I feel like I did it. It's not the way that I had visioned it starting out. But without music, I would have never been a part of this. So just work hard and keep swimming.
Thanks,
All right.
Rob.
No, man, thank y'all.
That's great.
Well done.
No, thank y'all.